Trust is the fuel for all of life. Going from implied to earned, it doesn't happen easily. Sometimes it's very hard, but it's pretty special. If your audio doesn't match your video, can you be trusted?
Trust is not just relational texture, it's one of the mechanics through which leadership actually improves. From a scientific perspective, the findings are very strong that trust is not a soft add on to leadership, it's a performance relevant, culture shaping force. Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership, why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm delighted you've joined us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm honored to be joined by retired Army Lieutenant General Doug Gabram. Doug retired in 2022 after more than 38 years of service. He served as an Army aviator, primarily flying AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, and held the rare distinction of commanding troops in combat from the captain level all the way to the general officer level. Later in his career, he led large, complex organizations at the 2 and 3-star level. Even after retirement, he has remained deeply committed to mentoring and developing leaders. Doug believes that trust is one of the most important, perhaps the most important, ingredients in building championship teams and leading effectively. That makes him the perfect guest for today's topic. Doug, thanks for joining me on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Hey, Tom, I really appreciate it. And it's I know a lot of people say this, but it's a privilege and honor to be with you on this podcast. As you look back and all the superstars, all stars, great leaders throughout the corporate world, the military have been in your show, not to mention the 51 generals that you interviewed in your four-star general book, and which the four C's revolve around. And I'm not going to promo your book, but it's really important because I've used it so much. It's really amazing and relevant. And when people hear four stars, sometimes they tend to, well, that's for generals, and it's not even close. Your book is really great at the tactical to strategic level, and it's for younger leaders all the way up to senior executive, senior leaders. So I just want to, not a plug, but I think we're going to talk about some of those characteristics later in the podcast. But I just wanted to highlight that and say thank you very much.
Well, that's highly flattering and encouraging, Doug, and I really appreciate that endorsement. So thanks. Let's dive right into our conversation, Doug. Today we're talking about trust, and that's a word that we've talked about some on the podcast before, but it gets used constantly in conversations about leadership, but often without much precision. You've clearly thought deeply about it, so let's start with the basic question: how do you define trust?
So Tom, you've mentioned that there's if you Google the word trust, you will find, just like the word love, you'll find multiple definitions, you'll find frameworks, you'll find vignettes, you'll find how to do, etc. Matter of fact, the Webster Dictionary defines trust as a noun, which is assured reliance on character, ability, and strength of truth of someone or something. That's pretty good. I came up with again, as I did my research and experience, I kind of go to this definition: the unconditional belief that you can rely on someone or something to achieve a certain result. So there's some key words in there: unconditional belief, and not only with a person, but something, which could be your product, the platform, etc. There's a lot to unpack there. And really, my goal today is to make folks out there think about your definition. As we talk about trust, what does it mean to you? And also think about your experiences, good and bad, with trust, and how important you think trust is in leading effective, cohesive organizations. And I'll add, to build championship teams. So I also think, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the podcast, there's different levels of trust. I call it an implied trust, and then an earned trust as we go deeper into it, or a combination of both. So that's kind of the opening. A lot to unpack there. So
Yeah, that's really helpful for starting us off on the discussion. And you just mentioned something there that I like to really dig into a bit more, and that's this difference between implied and earned trust. Can you expand a bit on that difference between implied and earned trust for us?
yeah, I think the basic definition is, implied could mean your position, your authority, your job title, your family, who you are in your family, father, husband, wife, etc. And then as we go through tough times, repetition, other things that we'll talk about, I think it gets to be earned, and that takes time. It's also very fragile. if I compare it or talk about trust in the military ranks, really that defines our profession of arms. You know, trust has been proven on the battlefield so many times. And this example is implied because if you wear the American flag, we're coming for you, whether you're wounded or I mean, it's happening right now on TV today. We had an F-15 go down in Iran, and there's nothing we will not do to get that pilot out. And that's pretty strong. No other military in the world does that. That aspect of trust is paid with blood and sacrifice through many decades, through many conflicts. And that's again what sets us apart. I got a quick story that it's very short, that I've kept with me throughout the years and shared with other people. And I wish I knew the author. It's unknown, but it's named Comradeship. And I think many can relate to this. And it goes like this. So when a soldier was injured and couldn't get back to safety, his buddy went out to get him against his officer's orders. He returned mortally wounded, and his friend, who he had carried back, he was dead. The officer was very angry, and I told you not to go. Now I've lost both of you, and it was not worth it. The dying man replied, but it was, sir, because when I got to him, he said, Jim, I knew you'd come. I've seen him multiple times on the battlefield and with our profession, and it's pretty powerful. I just, real quick, Tom, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a story, more of a relevant story
Sure.
that I experienced when I was a battalion commander in Iraq. One of my company commanders, call sign Bearcat 6, was conducting convoy security, which is security for a moving convoy. In this case, he was escorting 4 vehicles, providing overwatch, and it went bad. One of the vehicles was hit by an ID. The truck turned over. It was on fire. Radios were going crazy. Soldiers on the ground reacted as they were trained to react. They're pulling their buddies out. They were on fire. Wasn't a pretty scene. We immediately, Apache, started going into what we do, and that's looking for not only the ID, but a wire, a triggerman, anything that was peculiar that we could develop. And we did. We found a house nearby that was very suspicious, and we vectored the infantrymen to that house and captured the suspected enemy. But the day was tragic and it was very costly, and we had several soldiers we lost on the ground. So what came next is what I want to get to, and it's kind of hard to describe. And I know some of your audience out there have gone through this, but at the memorial we conduct at the command post. There's a couple different before a soldier leaves theater, that's done, but the one at the command post is very raw, and it's a chance for his buddies to say goodbye. So my team, my aviators were there as we always are when we lose somebody on the ground, and I was there with the battalion commander. So again, very personal, very raw emotion from 20-year olds. It's very tough, and this happens, and then the body goes to Bagram in Afghanistan's case, and then we have another ramp ceremony, and then go back to Dover, go back home. So as we looked at this, and my aviators and the infantrymen were embracing tears, moments of grief, sacrifice. I was talking to the battalion commander, and he says, "Hey, Doug, I gotta send him back tomorrow. We had a tough mission, and we gotta go back." So we walked over to my pilots, and we walked over to the infantrymen, and the young infantry company commander was there, and the battalion commander explained, "Hey, we got to go back. I got to send you back out tomorrow." So you can imagine at that time and at that point, the emotion, with tears that still in his eyes, he looked up and he said, "Yes, sir. Whatever needs to be done, we'll go." But I have one request, and this is to his boss. He says, "I need Bearcat 6 over my shoulder, protecting our convoy, protecting us." Um, he looked at me for an indication of a yes, and I said, "That's not necessary. Of course, we'll be there." Um, as this all happened, you could see, the implied trust that we have protecting our soldiers on the ground was obviously a given. But through this event, which was pretty emotionally significant, your earned trust goes up. And that's a day that I'm sure all those that were involved will never forget. And from that point on, we worked with this unit again, and it was, there wasn't anything we wouldn't do for each other. But that's not uncommon, as you obviously I pointed out the example that's happening today. So that's going from implied to earned, and it doesn't happen easily. Sometimes it's very hard, but it's pretty special.
Certainly. Thanks for sharing those too. The story about the soldiers who went out there on the battlefield, sacrificed his life to bring his buddy back. And obviously this story about Bearcat 6 and those both really are poignant, great examples of what trust looks like. As you were talking, I was thinking about the difference between implied and earned is there's positionality to it. Typically, we would say, somebody in a certain role, there's implied trust. We trust, maybe depending on, where you are in society or things, you may trust police officers. Most people trust firefighters, let's say, right? Because
Right.
they're a firefighter and they're in this role and they're here to help. And then there's earned trust where somebody has done something that is really sort of deserving with regard to in your relationship with them. They've earned your trust. And so both of those do a good job of demonstrating that, I think, at least from my perspective. Let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Give us a good segue into the next part of our conversation. Why is this, important? And so why is trust so important in leadership?
So this probably is your most important question of the day. Read a book years ago called Trust. It's by Henry Cloud. And I remember one of his quotes in there, and this is pretty powerful, and that is, trust is the fuel for all of life.
Hmm.
Trust is the fuel for all of life. If you compare that to the professional and your personal world, I would just ask to think about it, but let me counter with a question to maybe illustrate a point. And that is, can you be an effective leader without trust? Now, I think our audience out there would probably, from the tactical to strategic level in both military and the business worlds, would probably say no, right? So if the answer is no, why is it so important? Well, because it's foundational, it's core, it's the blood of effective leadership. And if you don't have trust, what do you have? You have casual relationships, you have ineffective teams, you have families that don't trust each other, which we'll unpack maybe in a little bit about the family aspect of this and throw a couple of analogies at it. The why is almost you can reverse your logic on it and then kind of work back from there. We talked about positions of authority, your rank, what you are, but that only gets you so far. I think you've heard this before, and one of your great leaders that have been on your podcast, one of my old bosses who I learned incredible from is that if your audio doesn't match your video, right? You heard
Yeah.
that. If
Mhm.
your audio doesn't match your video, can you be trusted? And we've all seen people like this. People talk and talk, but there's no action. And one of my tests on this is when your boss, when the door closes and he's told you he'll support you on ABC, but behind closed door he doesn't do that. That could be a problem. So in this category, Tom, I would ask all the listeners out there, and this is pretty simple. Think about 3 people that you trust in your life. 4, whatever, just maybe 3 is easier. Why? And list it out. Write it out. Why do you trust your father, or why do you trust whoever it is, your boss? And I think you'll answer the question. And it may not look, there's a lot of different words out there: because he's reliable, because he or she is competent, because he or she, the audio does match the video. So I think if you start with that question, it'll lead you to some very significant answers, and I think it'll help you evaluate yourself.
Doug, as you were sharing that, and I appreciate that. It's helpful, and I think it hits the nail on the head. You were saying, if you don't have trust, what do you have? And you have these casual relationships. And that led me to thinking about trust in the sense that initially when I think about trust, I think of a spectrum. From
Mhm.
one end, you have utmost trust. On the other, you have distrust. So I was thinking about it like that, as this continuum from distrust to complete trust. But then I decided that, in a sense, it's almost binary. That is, that if you don't have trust, at least the psychological makeup of humans is that you have distrust. And that's really important because distrust erodes. So there, it erodes relationship. It erodes
Mm.
the ability to get things done because if you distrust someone, and a lot of times you're actively trying to work against them or trying to counter what they're doing versus a neutral state, you know? So I was thinking of it like that, so that not only this, and it's sort of a leadership epiphany is a strong word for me here, but in this moment, it almost is epiphanal in the sense that as leaders, if we are not cultivating trust, if we're not building trust in our teams, if there is no trust, in fact, that's distrust.
Hmm.
And that distrust then operates against us. It's not just a weight, if a dead weight that we're pulling along, but it's actually a force driving in the other direction. I'm going to have to cogitate on that some. I'm probably going to have to write some on that because I don't recall. I've read a bunch of books on trust, Stephen Covey and so on, but I don't recall anybody articulating that sort of concept. Anyway, but that sprang from what you were talking about there. So that was, I always enjoy it when in the moment, in these conversations with people, I have this flash of insight. It's like, wow, that's really cool. So thanks for that.
And I just, it's a little mushy, but I think it's important. Let's just keep on the family side right now.
Sure.
Can you have love without trust? And then there's different levels of love, right? So, but trust is almost the same thing. So, yeah, I trust my uncle, but I may not, love him type of thing. I think both of those words, if we're talking about the professional sense, maybe not, but on the family, because a lot of people struggle with this, on a family basis, right?
Yeah.
So anyway,
More about this. I know you had 38 years of service plus what you've done since, but like you've had a lot of experience in foreign contexts and international relations and so forth. Do you have a good example of a story that you could share with us that really exemplifies, maybe from an international perspective, what trust
yeah.
really looks like?
Yeah, Tom, actually, I do, and it's as the listeners evaluate this, there's different thoughts on our international partners, but in a conflict, and I'll just use Iraq and Afghanistan, one of our primary missions was to be shoulder to shoulder with them and partner with them, right? So they could succeed. And things happen. There's some distrust that happened. There's some events that happened. And what happened to me, I had to make a decision, and I could have been wrong very easily. But I was commanding the Southern Afghanistan Task Force in Kandahar, working with then the 205th Corps Commander, General Hamid, and I've been working with them for about a month, so we were feeling each other out. And you know how that goes. Kind of the first month is always interesting. Another one of my partners was an individual called. He was the police chief of Kandahar, General Razik. General Razik was on the hit list, the number one Taliban hit list. So he was the most. When we were around him, we had to be careful. Um, but we were promoting him to 3-star, and we were doing it in Kandahar downtown. So we drove our MRAPs downtown. So who was there? We had General Hamid, the Army Corps Commander. We had General Razik getting promoted. We had the governor of Kandahar there, and myself, a senior general officer. So we did this ceremony, very interesting, a little bit different than what you're used to here. It was over at about 4:30, so it's getting dark in about 2 hours maybe, and we're getting ready to depart in our MRAPs and head back to the forward operating base. And General Meade, 205th Corps Commander, approached me and said, "You can't leave yet. You can't leave right now." I said, "Hmm." He had significant intelligence that we were going to get hit going back to the forward operating base because we had to go through the city, and it was, cities aren't the best place to be in a dangerous environment. So I looked at my deputy, and he was not too happy. He said, "Sir, we got to go now. We'll have air cover. I'll get the QRF, the Quick Ready Reaction Force, spun up." I looked at General Hamid, and General Hamid said, "Do you trust me?" And this isn't, you got 10 minutes to figure this out, pros and cons. I mean, you got to answer. It was one of those times, and I said, I trust you. So, needless to say, my deputy wasn't exactly happy, but General Hamid said, "I will get back with you in 1 hour, and I'll give you a situational report of the tactical situation." And I said, "Okay." He got back to me within that hour, and he said, "The route is clear." And I asked him a few tactical questions, And he answered, but we were ready to go. We were going to leave. And needless to say, my guys were like, sir, you know, okay, we'll see how this goes. But as a commander, you never want to put your people at risk unless you absolutely have to. So I was, I was torn there. Um, are we going? Are we getting led into an ambush? Are we going to get hit anyway? Can he really supply the forces that we needed to actually shut down a route to go through the city? Well, he did, and we got through, no problems. It was a pretty impressive show of force of what he did, and I got back to the forward operating base. My deputy said, he didn't say good job, but he said, I'm glad we're home safe. But we established a trust between our forces and the 205th Corps. He called me on the phone and he said, sir, do you trust me now? And I said, I do. And from that time on, for the rest of the tour, which was another 8 or 9 months, I forget, but we, we had a great time. We executed multiple combat missions, joint combat missions, joint air assaults, and it was a great experience. So we operated shoulder to shoulder, and we had that trust between us. And I really believe, if we were down, he was coming for us, and we certainly were, vice versa. So back to your question, that was my one experience with. I don't want to say international trust. I know there'll be maybe some opinions out there for our listeners, but that was our mission, and we executed it.
Well, that's a powerful example. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It really, there are multiple things that we can learn from that. It demonstrates that power of earned trust. He earned your trust. I think one thing that it really shows, from my perspective at least, is the importance of being the first to extend trust. As leaders, we have to be willing to trust others first. We can't withhold our trust until they've proven themselves worthy of it. We have to start off by saying, hey,
Yeah.
you're on my team and I'm going to trust you. And I think when we do that, it fosters an environment that is self-reinforcing. If we don't trust people, they know it. We know when people don't trust us, and vice versa. And so if we don't trust them, it creates this cycle where they don't trust us, which means we won't be able to lead them at all. However, when we do go first, when we do trust people first, not only does it foster their trust in us, it also induces this phenomenon that we've talked about before on the podcast called the Pygmalion effect. And that's this psychological phenomenon where people, it's amazing really, people respond the way we expect them to. If we treat someone
Right.
as trustworthy, in most cases, they'll live up to it. If we treat them as untrustworthy, in most cases, they will live down to that as well. So as leaders, it's really incumbent on us to trust first. It shows that trust is not merely about liking someone or thinking well of them. It is confidence in their reliability and their presence and their willingness to act.
I go back to the decision, and I don't know if I was lucky, but the decision, my guys are telling me one thing, and there's an Afghan general that I barely knew telling me another thing, but my gut just said we need to do this. And of course, we had a couple backstops and reserves in place to react. But I think another thing it emphasizes, when we make decisions on who we trust and what we trust, in terms of, I'll just use platforms from the military, there's consequences if you make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
So this gets hard. Even in the business world, you can make the same application, and in our families, who we trust. And if we make a mistake, to your point earlier about distrust, we have to deal with the consequences. So
Yeah. Well, as I was, thinking about this idea of trust, we look at it, trust in leadership. It's really, you brought up the book earlier in the framework, the 4 stars framework, but our character, if we talk about the first one, our character fosters trust because trust depends on integrity. We trust people of character, people who have demonstrate reliability, who are going to be there, who have integrity, their word and their deed are aligned. Our competence builds trust because people need confidence that we can actually lead. Caring, caring matters because people trust leaders more deeply when they feel like they matter to their leader. And then finally, communication builds trust because trust rises or falls every day based on what leaders say and do not say, and whether they live up to and live out those words. So, from that standpoint, the 4 C's align perfectly with trust and the importance in leadership.
yeah, they do, Tom, and you could and you did in the book, and you dissect each one of those. And I don't know how many times trust was mentioned in the book, but it was quite a few. You could use those four And to your point, if you don't have one of those, people always ask me a lot of times about what's the most important aspect of leadership. You have four, but I think the conclusion you probably reached is it's a character. Because if you don't have that, then I for sure can't trust you. And we've all made mistakes. Competence, uh, you might. I mean, I think we're going to talk about it at the end about if I was younger, what would I advise? Um, but might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer. Um, you're caring, you care, but you might not be good at displaying that. And your communication skills, we all got to work on it. It takes repetition. My wife says, Doug, you talk a lot, but you seldom communicate. So I'm still working on it, right? But for all those things, you're maybe a B minus or a C plus. But if you're an A plus in character, you can get there.
Yeah.
So I think it's most important.
Let's take a couple minutes to touch on the research that strongly supports what Doug's been talking about here. One of the foundational models in the trust literature comes from Roger Mayer, James Davis, and David Sherman, who propose that trust is strongly shaped by three perceptions: ability, benevolence, and integrity. Those really fit quite well with what we've been talking about with the four C's. In plain terms, people trust leaders when they believe those leaders are capable, genuinely care about them, and consistently do what is right. A second major contribution from Kirk Dirks and Donald Farron, whose meta-analysis on trust and leadership showed that trust is associated with a range of important outcomes, including stronger attitudes toward the leader and organization, greater willingness to engage, and better performance-related behaviors. And third, work by Boys, Fizet, and Gill demonstrated that trust and communication help explain how leadership translates into team performance and creativity. In other words, trust is not just relational texture. It's one of the mechanics through which leadership actually improves. So, from a scientific perspective, the findings are very strong that trust is not a soft add-on to leadership. It's a performance-relevant, culture-shaping force. Doug, when you hear these findings, what resonates with you and your experience the most?
Well, the first thing you said, and I wrote it down, the findings are very strong that trust is not a soft add-on to leadership. It is not a soft add-on. It's a hard, I mean, it's as I told you, it's foundational in the definition. I would think about it, maybe add this on the comments on the science, um, and take it just a little bit in a different direction. And that is, think about the teams that you've been on. Many of us have had the privilege to be on great teams, whether that's military, corporate, sports, and then we've all the average, or I mean, we've all had probably been on some average or good teams. What is the difference between good and great teams? If you had to answer that, how would you do that? Similar to how many people do you trust in your life? Their names, write it down. Um, so good to great. And if you answer that for yourself, I think you may find some very similar conclusions that you just covered.
Yeah, that's a helpful exercise. I would recommend that folks take the time to think about, at least, if not write down. So, well, Doug, let's make this practical for the listeners. For the leader listening right now, whether in healthcare, business, education, the military, or any other field for that matter, how do you recommend that they build trust?
So I don't want to go back to the four C's, but there's a lot to unpack there. I believe you actually mentioned it in the book, and it's many of senior mentors of mine have talked about this. And if what I'm about to say, if you really think this through, it's very difficult. And that's number one: do the right thing, the right way for the right reason. Do the right thing, and the right thing is usually the harder choice over the easier wrong. And man, we step on almost every day in our life? Do we step up to the line on that? We do in a lot of ways. Um, so if you can, as a leader, in terms of practicality and how to measure it, if you could do that, and we're all human, we all many of times have not done that, and we've talked our way out of it. But if you could do the right thing, the right way for the right reason, I think you're well on your way to earning trust, and not only for yourself but for your teammates. Like, given a crisis situation, and I know Collins will do the right thing. Just start with that one. That's really powerful. But the right thing may cost you political capital, may cost you your job. You're not in the majority. You're in the unpopular timeout closet. Um, and it also, another phrase I like to use is, a lot of times you got to remember it's leadership over likership. We have a
Yeah.
problem with that sometimes. We all want to be liked,
Right.
but we have to apply leadership. And sometimes when you do the right thing the right way for the right reason, those two may rub together. So Tom, I'd probably throw that back at you. And those have always been really powerful with me.
Yeah, I think certainly that is something I covered in the book and have a figure for it about that. That is how we get to great leadership from a character standpoint is doing the right thing, the right way for the right reason. I think that when we do that, people, to your point about liking, I think most people, unless they're morally bankrupt, corrupt in real ways, they may not like it, but they usually will respect it. They will usually see that, hey, this person is doing this from a place of principle, of character, of not self-serving. Because just as you said, when you do the right thing in the right way for the right reason, most of the time it'll cost you, whether it's
Yeah.
political capital, whether it's hide off your rear end, whatever it is, it'll cost you. And so people, at the very least, will respect that. So yeah, I agree with you.
And
Um,
Tom, when you do that, when you're taking risk, right? And let's say it's a really hard decision, and one of your C's is communication. You have to communicate to your team why you made that decision, and even though they may not
right.
agree with you, they'll respect you. And a lot of times in a formation or a company or military, a decision is made, and you say, "Yeah, I can see that," but it's the leader's job to communicate that intent, the why, the Simon Sinek why, the
Yeah,
purpose is really important.
yeah. That reminds me of so our governor is Andy Bashir, and he has some talking points, out on the trail, as it were. And but one thing that he likes to talk about is this time when he interacted with somebody from across Kentucky, and the guy basically it was about Bashir's stance on a given social topic, and how he had vetoed something, and the guy said, I don't agree with you, but I know you did it out of a place of character, out of a place of principle, and I respect that. And so that reminds me of exactly what we're talking about here with regard to that. As I was thinking about, how do we build trust, and thinking about the four C's from the work and everything, I came up with five what I would say fairly easy steps to start building trust using those. And the first is pretty simple: be reliable. Do what you say you will do. Trust is often built through repeated small acts of consistency, not just necessarily these tremendous life-changing things, but it's day in, day out consistency. Do what you say you will do. Second, be competent. Know what you're doing. Good intentions matter, but people also need confidence in your judgment and your ability. So work hard to know what you're doing. Third, show up in the hard moments. Trust
Right.
usually grows most during adversity. People remember who was present when things were difficult. If you want to be distrusted, be absent in adversity. I remember General Dempsey telling me when I interviewed him, share adversity with those that you lead. It's important that you do that. Fourth, care about your people as people, not just things to get your work done. If people think you're just treating them as tools for your success, you'll never build the trust that it takes to do great things. And finally, communicate honestly. Often leaders feel like we need to know everything, but you don't. You don't have to know everything, but you do have to be truthful about what you know, what you don't know, and what comes next. I think that is imperative. And we see tremendous failure of that, I think, in our society in this present moment, that people are not being honest about what they don't know. And that's affecting trust quite widely. So anyway, those are the five things that I came up with, steps to start building trust.
No, I think those are great. And I don't know if you have time for another quick story.
Sure.
You went through this, and we've talked about a lot about people during this podcast, and you know, some remember what the definition original, but it's someone or something. Well, the thing, what's that mean? It's kind of like our products, our platforms. You know, when you fly, we all fly, right? So when we get on the steps and we're walking up into the airplane, it's an implied trust that the airplane's going to not fall out of the sky and the
Right.
pilots know what they're doing. When I was a two-star commander, I was in charge of all the airworthiness for all the helicopters in the Army, and we had a significant material failure in the main rotor head, and we'd already lost a couple pilots.
Mm.
And um, being an Apache guy, I took it very personal because this aircraft carried me through multiple dilemmas and situations. It got me home, and I'll just say it was personal, but we had to do the right thing for the soldiers and the aviators because if we're not combat effective, we're not accomplishing our purpose in the Army, and that is to win our nation's wars. So for a year, so your five things just sparked up. For a year, I held a meeting at 4 o'clock every Friday with the company that I needed to have it with, and we talked. We held each other accountable, and it took us a year to not to troubleshoot. We knew what the problem was, but to have engineers fix the problem, and we had a solution. We had mitigations to the aircraft that we had to do before they flew, and we did all that. But that was a thing, that was a platform, but it was so important, and here's why. Because if the field loses trust in that aircraft, or you can pick a tank or anything,
Sure.
or a product you're selling,
Hmm.
your company's making, if they lose trust in that, you've lost. Right? You just it's not going to work. So that stays with me a long time, and we it was a costly road for a lot of people involved, and but we you know, back to the doing the right thing the right way for the right reasons. We did that as a team and got to where we needed to be. So
Yeah, I'm reminded of Johnson and Johnson and cyanide poisoning of Tylenol back in the early '80s, and the decision to recall every Tylenol
yeah,
bottle across the country. Um, Ended up being only like 7 bottles that were actually contaminated, but they chose to do that, and that stands as a perfect example, I think, of what you're talking about. So
yeah,
as I was preparing for our conversation, I was thinking, in addition to active steps people can take to begin building trust, I was also thinking about sort of what I would call a quick pulse check to help people assess the trust environment in their team. And for that pulse check, I would recommend that leaders regularly ask themselves some hard questions. And those questions are these: do my people believe I am for them? Do they believe I can be counted on? Do they believe that I'm telling them the truth? Do they believe I will be there when it matters most? If the answer to those questions is no or even uncertain, then as a leader, you got to redirect significant effort into trust building. You got to make that a real priority because you're in bad shape if any of those is no or uncertain, I think.
yeah. I would add a twist to that, and I totally. Those are four great questions for self grading. See, if we ask ourselves that, we're usually going to probably say yes, yes. Because self reflection is very difficult. Here's what I would add to that. That because you got to get a feedback mechanism to answer those questions. And whether your inner circle, your group, you remember those three or four people you trust, five, whatever it
Yeah,
is, ask those questions about yourself. Hey, Tom, do my people believe I am for them? What do you think? You might get a different response. And I
sure.
guarantee if you talk to your wife or your mother, you might get a different response.
Yeah,
So, so the point is to measure yourself, that you might need an external
yeah,
person you
sure.
trust to answer those because that'll help you grow and get better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. Well, Doug, before I let you get out of here, I have one last question for you. If you could go back to your younger self at, let's say, 22 years of age and say, listen, Gabram, this is the most important thing you need to do to build trust, what would you say?
22, Tom?
I'm just
Um,
21, 25, whatever.
yeah, those were so first off, most of the 21, 22-year-olds that are out there, and if you're listening, you're twice as smart as I ever was. Um, and you could do multiple things. You could juggle a lot of balls and um, that I couldn't. But it's interesting going back to 22. Here's my what I talk to my kids about is what's the biggest variable in life that you have? The biggest variable, it's time.
Yeah,
So how do you spend your time? It's okay if I eat that crap for the next 10 years because I'm 20 years old, because you're into you're strong and smart.
yeah,
So time is the biggest variable. And then, you can't make it complex. So we've hit on it, but I would say as a 22-year-old, whether you're wherever you're at in the military, you're starting out in the business world or whatever, you got to be in the arena with your people. You got to be engaged. You got to grind. Um, you got to commit, like you said before, those hard times. Because there's a great quote that many people have heard it, but when you're younger, your peers and maybe your immediate supervisors, they don't really care how much you know until you show them how much you care. So if you check that block, you can learn competence and you can learn, whatever your profession or your trait, you can learn that. But if you don't care, you're going to be found out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, but that's something if you think about it, you can work on. So it's funny being the son of a general officer sometimes is not easy. And so
Imagine
because he
not.
gets a lot of guidance. And in when my son went away to college, he heard everything. He's got all the just like dad guidance, right? But I gave him a baseball bat, not to hit anybody, but it was a nice bat, and it was engraved two things, and it was work hard and never quit. As now, remember, Tom, you put me at 22 years old,
Yeah.
so work hard and never quit, and it still applies as you get older. So those are some thoughts or comments in the younger years that I might emphasize.
Yeah. Doug, thanks for sharing those. I'm struck by it is certainly, I'm sure, hard to be the son of a general officer. Similar, my kids, the amount of information that I try to download into them, especially when it comes to this stuff, right? Like they know all about all these different, the Pygmalion effect and, confirmation bias and all these sorts of things that are related to leadership, because I'm always trying to pour into them. And so it's funny yeah, it's probably hard to be, I'm sure it's hard to be, or annoying to be my kid too. So, but it's all good intention, right? It's all good intention.
It is.
So, well, Doug, this has been an outstanding conversation. It's been a real honor and privilege to have you on the Science of Leadership. Thanks for joining me and for sharing your reflections, the stories, and for your example. You've made it clear that trust isn't abstract. It's lived, earned, tested, and remembered. And I really appreciate you.
Well, again, Tom, thanks for the opportunity to discuss this pretty passionate topic, and I really feel privileged and humbled to be on your show. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly know the people you work with and lead. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing. For joining us on this episode of Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly know the people you work with and lead. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.